Yeah, I think we're starting. Let me switch in Turkish first and then switch back in English, okay? Merhaba arkadaşlar. Bugün Nomad Capitalist ile birlikteyim. Andrew kendisi danışmanlık veriyor dijital göçebelere. E, Vergi konusunda yardımcı oluyor. Hani sonuçta dijital göçebeler farklı ülkelerde yaşıyorlar. Kendi ülkelerine değil de nereye vergi verecekleri konusunda sorun yaşayabiliyorlar. Bu noktada yardımcı oluyor. Kendisi YouTube kanalı da var. YouTube kanalında Türkiye ile ilgili de videolar vardı. Ben de oradan tanımıştım kendisini. İletişime geçtim. Şimdi bir röportaj gerçekleştireceğiz. Yeah, thank you for joining me. Thank you for sharing your time with me. Uh, I'm really happy and curious about some topics because I saw your videos about Turkey. I think 3 videos you did it. You are really dive into about our situation, and you are researching about our country also. And I must say, uh, being digital nomad and working remotely is getting popular rapidly. That's why I opened this YouTube channel, and here we are. Can you little bit talk about yourself first?
Yeah, so I started Nomad Capitalist as a way to share what I've been studying for over a decade now, which is how to go where you're treated best. I grew up in the United States. The United States was never really a place that I entirely felt was a home for me.
Mhm.
And I remember my father saying when I was 12 years old, he says, you don't have to live in the same city as your parents, in the same state in the US. You don't even have to live in the same country. Go where you're treated best. And that's what I've done. And I remember 06, 07, 08, I started diving into traveling and I started making observations about what each place I traveled did better
Mhm.
than other places. Um, and started figuring out, which things I wanted in my life. And I continue to do that. My story is one of freedom. It's one of believing in options and choices. It's one of believing that everyone should do what's best for them.
Mhm.
And I believe that, if you just look at, travel freedom, you talk about being a digital nomad, you look at travel freedom going back to the mid 2000s, 2005, the number of visa free countries that even Western citizens like the US
Mhm.
had has greatly increased since then. The world is for the large part opening up with some minor or smaller exceptions. The world is opening up. And so I think it's going to be
Mhm.
a lot easier for people, including people from Turkey, to go where they're treated best.
Yeah, exactly. And earning dollars is getting more important in Turkey, as you know, because our currency down rapidly in summer, and we have election in March, and then we don't know what's gonna happen. So people really try to get into Amazon or other stuffs, other opportunities. Uh, and can you tell about your situation and how to help people?
Well, I think there's two steps to what I would call the nomad capitalist lifestyle. I don't necessarily, talk about this from a digital nomad perspective because there's a whole set of things people imagine when they think digital nomad. They think living in Thailand, drinking coconuts, working as little as possible. That's not all digital nomads, but that's the perception that a lot of people who come to me think, and they're looking to avoid that. Here's the reality. The borders have greatly come down.
Mhm.
So when I gave up U.S. citizenship, people told me I was crazy.
Mhm.
And when I look back at the biggest thing that I lost by no longer being a U.S. citizen, it would be for the average person access to the U.S. job market, the
Mhm.
ability to get a job in the United States and make good money. As an entrepreneur, I don't really need or want that, but What's interesting is that so many companies now, if you have a skill, they don't care if you're a U.S. citizen. Oh, you're in Turkey? Okay, great. I help so many people who are freelancers, who are high-powered consultants, go offshore. So the first thing you need to do is you need to make enough money to make it work. There's the kind of digital nomad thing where it's, how do I make $1,000 a month? The taxes don't matter as much. I just get on a plane and go somewhere. But when you start making 6 and 7 figures, that's when you want to put together the tax strategy of how do I make sure that I'm not going to be paying Turkey? How do I make sure that I'm off the hook, that I'm not a tax resident in Turkey? How do I make sure that I don't go and become a tax resident somewhere else? People call me and say, Andrew, I'd love to live in France full time. I said, great, you're going to pay a fortune.
Yeah.
So structuring your affairs in Turkey to where you can be out of Turkey, that may include going and saying, I've got a home base over here, going and setting up residence somewhere, even if it's not your only residence. And then from there, it's just a matter of how do you want to live? I think one thing that works for a lot of people is having 2 or 3 homes. So for me, it's Montenegro in the summer, it's Malaysia in the winter. I spend time in Georgia. I may have another place I open up in the future, like a London. But I think the issue is, how do I be out once I'm making the money? How am I out of Turkey? And then how do I go and make sure that, on paper, I'm living somewhere else, and then figure out where I really want to live?
Yeah. Yeah. Can we dive into technical terminologies?
Yeah.
Because what is the difference between tax residency, citizenship, and physical location?
Well, sometimes it overlaps, and it depends on the country that you're from. Citizenship, of course, is you're a citizen of the country. So if you're a Turkish citizen, you have a Turkish passport, then that's your citizenship. That doesn't really matter that much in this equation for most people. It matters for U.S. citizens, but that's about the only citizenship that matters. A Turkish citizen might encounter, small hiccups. Maybe, I don't know, maybe Armenia doesn't let you open bank accounts or something. But I mean, there's generally not going to be an issue with citizenship. The issue is going to be your tax residence. So if you're living in Turkey and you're presumed to be living in Turkey, then that's where you're going to be tax resident. That's where you spend your time. So there's a days test. Generally, it's 183 days. If you spend more than that time, they're going to tax you. In Turkey, they tax you on your worldwide income if that's the case. The issue is not only spending less time than that 183 days, so less than 6 months in Turkey, but also establishing connections somewhere else. And so, there is a difference between residence and tax residence. I have a residence card in Montenegro, in Colombia, I got a bunch of them. Some of those countries I never go to. Some of them I won't renew. Some of them may become a citizenship in the future. Some of them I do spend time in, but not enough time to be tax resident. And so that's kind of the loophole. I imagine that, for the EU and the US, it's going to be more difficult to deal with those loopholes than for Turkey, although Turkey's somewhat on the ball. So the issue is, can I not be tax resident in Turkey? Can I be a resident somewhere else where I have an apartment where I like to spend part of my time? Let's say Malaysia, for example, where they're a lot easier in terms of tax. And then maybe I travel from Malaysia to other places using my Turkish passport. So the only reason the citizenship is really important in the digital nomad traveling equation is which countries can you get into, i.e. if you're a Turkish citizen and you want to go to Paris, you need to get a visa.
Yeah, exactly. And if I want to give up my Turkish tax residency, I don't have to give up my passport, right?
Yeah, so people have, and this is where I think it's good to ask the terms. This is something I'm constantly dealing with when people come and they want our help, is they say, oh, I don't want to give up my citizenship. Or, oh, I need a citizenship. I made a video called Does Dual Citizenship Lower Your Taxes? And people think, oh, if I'm British and I get a second passport, I can not pay tax, whether I stay in the UK. I mean, there's a lot of misconceptions. You don't need to give up your Turkish citizenship. What you need to do is you need to give up your Turkish tax residence. So you're basically a tax resident by default because you're living there and you're paying taxes there. The first thing you need to do is to make sure you have a portable income. So if you set up a Turkish corporation to run your business, then that corporation is going to be taxed in Turkey. So first thing is we need to offshore the business to a country where it's going to tax at 0 or 5% or 9% or 10% or 2% or whatever. So the business needs to be outside of Turkey, and then you need to be outside of Turkey. So generally, we don't do much work with folks in Turkey, but I have some experience from people who may be wanting to go to Turkey. That the criteria is generally going to be spending less than half your time in Turkey, and I think generally to be safe, probably spending significantly less than half time, because what you want to do is be able to show, hey, this is my home over here. But no, you can keep your passport. The only real exception is for U.S. citizens. Plenty of Brits and Turks and Indians and everybody else living in Dubai or Monaco or Vanuatu, and they don't pay tax.
Yeah, yeah, it's really important point, and people they don't really research about it, and they'll find you, and you're helping them.
When you say people don't do a lot of, I mean, I think there's a misconception that I call the Nomad Tax Trap, which is I'm just going to leave the country and not do anything about it. I think it's always good to have a plan of action and to always know where you're going to, like, what's your plan? What's your story? I'm not saying make up a story, but I'm saying, who are you? Where do you live? What are you doing? This idea that you would go to a bank and they say, where do you pay tax? And you say, nowhere. Where do you live? I don't know. Like, that's going to become it already is becoming increasingly difficult. So you need to have a plan. Where's your residence? Where's your tax residence? How would you not have it in Turkey? And just thinking that if you just leave the country and just kind of come back every once in a while, that they're not going to tax you. A lot of people have made that mistake. And so Turkey may be a bit easier than, like, let's say in Australia, but there's just been this notion that people think, well, as long as, I just kind of come and go, they won't tax me. They're getting a lot better at this.
Yeah, exactly. And in Turkey, we can't use PayPal. That's one reason. That reason people started to take e-residency from Estonia, just using PayPal. And let's say someone has a passport from Turkey and paying taxes to Estonia and living in Malaysia. Is that possible, or they have to pay where they live?
Well, there are different kinds of countries in their tax system. So there are some countries where you live there full time and you pay no tax. There aren't that many of these, but Vanuatu perhaps is one of the cheaper ones to go to, and there's no tax. It's not a lot to do in Vanuatu, but it's tropical, it's warm, it's beaches, and so that's a zero tax country. Monaco, UAE, etc. Then there's territorial tax countries. This gets a little dicey. In general, money you earn outside the country is not taxed. There's some diciness in there in terms of your work and your salary and all that, but in general, the tax situation there is easier. Territorial tax countries like Malaysia, Thailand, Panama, Georgia. And then there's just low tax countries. Montenegro is pretty low tax, and they've got a relatively liberal tax regime. So, your tax home, it's an interesting concept to define. I mean, for the United States, it's, where do you live? And as long as you don't get into some other trap, i.e. you don't spend 6 months in some other country, it basically follows you. So the concept of tax home varies place by place. I think that if I'm from Turkey, what I'm going to want to do is get some kind of tax residence somewhere, either by proving wealth and just being given tax residence in a country where I can pay zero, or going and spending 6 months in a country like Malaysia that's not going to necessarily tax me just because I'm there. And again, it's hard to make, without knowing the individual person, it's hard to say exactly what to do, because someone who's actively running a business has a different situation than someone who's, just doing kind of passive consulting. But yeah, I mean, you can go and you can not pay tax. This is what I do. I think it's going to become harder and harder over time, but I think this is a benefit of being outside of the US, Australia, EU system, is that countries like Turkey, because it's a big country, I think they're probably going to have more developed rules because there's a lot of people and they're going to have a lot of people leaving. But I think that being Turkish citizen may be to your advantage to a certain extent because they're not going to be sitting around spending their every waking minute figuring out how to tax some guy who moved to Malaysia. And they're not going to make it as difficult as I think the EU will in 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, yeah, man. And I know you research about Turkish citizenship
Yeah.
and the economy of Turkey. What do you think about Turkish citizenship and the future of the economy of Turkey?
I mean, Turkish citizenship is interesting. I'm a citizenship geek. Um, Turkey has what I would call a great Tier C passport. So I say Tier A, you can go to the US. Tier B, you can go to Europe. Tier C is everything else. My partner is Russian, my life partner, my fiance.
Uh-huh.
And so she's got another kind of great Tier C passport where you guys can pretty much go everywhere except for the Western countries. So the EU, you need a visa, the US, Canada, Australia, all that. You have a great passport for really the rest of the world. You get a lot of countries that people that a lot of Tier B passports, let's say a Georgia or a Serbia or something nearby can't go to. You have Mexico, Paraguay, Thailand. You have a lot of these countries that make your passport pretty good, except for those Western countries. So the rest of the world pretty much respects it. The challenge with Turkish citizenship for someone like me is if you have a child, there's probably, if nothing changes, there's going to be a military requirement. And so if I became Turkish, do I want my kids to join them? I'm not like Turkish. I don't bleed Turkish. Do I want my kids, fighting the Turkish military? And so I think it's a good passport. I think it's an interesting citizenship program. I applaud the government for being open-minded and for wanting people to come in. And quite frankly, I think it's a great passport for someone that I work with who maybe already has a citizenship by investment program passport.
Okay. I know you research Turkish citizenship and the economy of Turkey. What do you think about Turkish citizenship and the future of the economy of Turkey?
Turkey is what I call a good Tier C passport. I label them Tier A, US visa free, Tier B, EU visa free, Tier C, everything else. And so there's a lot of really bad Tier C passports. I have an Egyptian friend. She can't go anywhere. And the places she can go, we went with her to Macau and they gave her a hard time. Turkey, I think, is pretty well respected in all the countries, except they need visas for the Western countries, the Anglo and the EU. Everywhere else, it's a great passport. And so if you have another passport, like let's say St. Lucia, that you can invest in that gets you everything else, I think Turkey is great. The challenge, for me is there's a military service requirement if you have kids. And so if you're not like really Turkish by blood, that may be a tough pill to swallow. But I could be Turkish. They don't want to draft me at 34 years old. And I could do that. I think it'd be a good passport to travel on. I think it will get better because, Turkey, like Russia, where my fiance is from, is a big country that has a lot of influence. And so they don't quite have enough influence to get, the EU visa free, although that may be coming, we'll see. But they have a lot of influence when it comes to all the other countries that you'd want to go to. So I think the Turkish passport is actually not nearly as bad as people think it is. Particularly, if the only other place you want to go is Europe, you just get a residence permit. Just go and invest some money, get residence. So, in terms of the investment program for Turkish citizenship, they lowered it from $1 million in real estate to 250. I think that was a smart move. I think it's priced appropriately. I think that the economy is very interesting because you have a lot of people who are waiting to see what happens on a political level. But demographically speaking, you've got a relatively young country where
Exactly.
people reproduce. You have one of the largest cities in the world that's growing, that's been up, I think, year over year for 25 years, has not seen a decline in Istanbul. I would not be really investing in beach resorts. unless I wanted to live in that beach resort, I'm not investing in a beach resort. I own property in Montenegro. I think that's a bit different story. But even then, it's really for my personal use.
Yeah.
I mean, anyone can create a
Not
beach resort.
renting or something.
Yeah, I mean, right. I mean, I like capital cities, and I think Istanbul is a very dynamic capital city. I mean, if I look at all these Eastern European countries that are enticing people to invest in exchange for immigration, I mean, the domestic market and the demographics in Istanbul far surpass a Tirana or a Tbilisi, which I love. I mean, there's a lot of good things there. The issue is, what happens politically. And so I don't get as much hung up on the politics as some people. I know that that's kind of the reason why, people have been, staying out. But I think it's a very interesting place to consider. I think that the biggest thing I consider is, what's going to be happening with the lira. But quite frankly, I understand that you want to buy in at the best deal. If I was taking a 20-year view, I think you can do all right in Istanbul.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And people really don't know about Turkey. We have really big economy. Some things going different and hard these times, but we have really young population and slowly but surely growing economy. But our territory has some dangers, Serbia side.
I mean, say what you want about your president. I mean, one of the things that's been a big initiative for him has been, almost trying to make Turkey like the next South Korea or the next Japan in terms of manufacturing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
When I buy a lot of products, I mean, particularly in Tbilisi, but when I buy a lot of products around the world, like in my homes, I'm buying a lot of stuff from Turkey.
Wow.
And that's become a big push in the last, decade to be exporting stuff. That's going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah, it's good to know. Yeah, let's see let's how it's changed. But I know people really curious about being digital nomad in Turkey and e-commerce, Amazon, FBA. It's getting really popular. That's why I'm so happy. I'm glad to see you and join me today. Thank you so much for everything, taking your time for me. And yeah, we will talk soon, I hope.
My pleasure. Great to be with you.
Thank you so much.